Good morning, welcome back everybody, and welcome to the first panel discussion of today's Smart Construction Virtual Summit. This panel, it's the keynote panel for the summit, and it's called The New Age of Smart Construction, Assessing the Latest Technologies, Innovations and Trends Transforming the Construction Landscape. So the purpose of this panel is really to tease out some of the key trends and technologies that are available today, and hopefully will be becoming available in the next, in the coming years. And the intention is to give you the opportunity to hear some leading experts talking about the topic of smart construction, but also to send in your questions to them. And I do encourage you to get involved in this conversation. It is such a critical time for construction and such an important part of the development of the industry. So send in your questions or even your observations, and we'll hopefully have a good discussion over the next hour. Before we get into the discussion, I would like to introduce the panelists. We have a wonderful selection of panelists who are from across different aspects of the industry, and I think provide a very good snapshot of where we are. So in alphabetical order, so Dr. Olusanwendu Ogbudu is the Centre Manager for the Centre of Excellence in Smart Construction at Heriot-Watt University in Dubai. Paul Patterson is the Manager for Project and Construction Management at GHD. Arsen Safarian is the Head of BIM and Digital Construction at ALEC. And Tim Shelton is the Digital Transformation and Innovation Lead for the Middle East at Arcadis. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you very much for your time. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. I'm going to come with you, Wendu. So you're from Heriot-Watt University. You represent the academic sector. And I think one of the most important aspects of the development of the digital economy and in the construction industry in particular, the smart construction industry, is that connection between the industry and the academic centres for research. And in the past, certainly in the Middle East, that perhaps has not been particularly well explored or well developed. So I wonder if you can just set us up at the beginning. Where are we? What are the sort of technologies that are being introduced at the moment, and what's coming down the line from the current research?
Thanks, Richard, and it's my pleasure to be speaking at this summit alongside an esteemed panel. I would split the way smart construction is going into 4 different categories. The first one would be construction materials and the use of technology to better understand materials and the development of materials. So some of the things that are happening are looking at using low energy construction materials, whereby you actually recycle a lot of materials, but also you reduce the amount of energy used in producing those materials. But at the same time, you've actually got to monitor how these materials will perform in the building. So we're looking at things like low power wireless sensor technologies embedded within the structure, monitoring how these materials will perform with occupants in it. Potentially might have robots in the building, either monitoring the building or being an occupant in the building and looking at how that building will perform. So we're looking at the concepts of smart building, the integrity of the building, material characteristics, healthy building, and interactions between human beings and the buildings. The other thing is looking at new materials and technologies to look at how you can sense what's happening within the materials within the building. We're looking at low energy materials and also looking at the micro and macro characterization of these materials. Potentially, these materials would be porous materials that can be used as insulation materials. If I can move out from the construction sector, there's things that are happening, within carbon capture and storage. And, these are things that happen at a deep level underground. And you could potentially be looking at 3D printing of the underground nature of what's happening within porous materials within the ground. And that potentially could be adapted in construction. The second thing I would like to talk about is robotics and using smart sensors for intelligent asset management. I mean, this is something that's been used quite a lot in the offshore environment, where you look at autonomous decision-making systems that can be adopted commercially. And it's more like human-operator interaction. It's almost like the robot and the human beings are working as a team to provide intelligent multimodal interfaces. And then robotics for health and well-being. So again, that's human-robot interaction. We're looking at things related to health and safety of workers on construction sites. I mean, these kind of robots have been used in assistive health for elderly and disabled people, and that potentially is something that we can use in construction. The third thing for me would be visualization and sensors. So you could use visualization to understand what's happening on the construction site, and from that you can begin to predict things related to health and safety happening on the construction site. You could be looking at things like wearable technologies, wireless body area networks, where you monitor things like body temperature, pulse, physical activities, the weather, and how people on site react to those. And then you can begin to monitor people's health. I think the last thing I'd like to end on, I think this is quite important for the construction industry, is we do need to start thinking about the next generation of professionals for Industry 4.0. What kind of skills do we need from the graduates or people that are currently working in industry? My view is that we need to get them really having a sense that things like data science, coding, BIM, sensing, monitoring, artificial intelligence, understanding resilience, smart cities, climate change, emotional intelligence, those are the kind of things that we need to be embedding within the curriculum of students coming out from universities, and also in terms of upskilling the workforce. I feel those are the kind of topics that we need to be thinking about. So, I know you touched upon the center, Richard, and I think the center is potentially a hub that can bring together the government, the private sector, and academia to begin to develop these things.
If I can just ask you on that, Wendy, so you're from as you just mentioned there, from the Centre of Smart Construction, Centre of Excellence for Smart Construction, Heriot Watt in Dubai. Now, as I understand it, that's the first sort of academic institution that's set up a smart construction hub in the Middle East. Is that, I mean, I don't know how big a global picture you have, but does that make us late to the party in this region? I mean, does every other country or the sort of leading construction markets, do they all have centres for smart construction and innovation? And is that a gap that we've got in this region?
Well, I think we're plugging the gap, but I wouldn't necessarily say we're late, because I think there's things that will arise from within the region that potentially other regions can learn from. So I think it's a question of, we've set up the center here. It's a center which is global in nature, because we'll be tapping into the research coming out globally. But it would also be exporting research that could be beneficial to other parts of the world.
Okay, thank you. Right, so just to briefly summarize, if I took my notes correctly, you've identified 4 trends: materials, materials, robotics, visualization, and skills, if I did my notes correctly. And then you've just touched on the Centre for Excellence for Smart Construction as a hub. If anybody has questions on any of those points for Wendy or any of the other panelists, you can send in your questions using the stage button on the right-hand side of the screen. You'll see a stage button, and you can type in at the bottom of the stage channel, and we will get your questions and we will answer them. But we'll come back to you, Wendy, in just a moment, but thank you for that. So Paul Patterson, I'm going to come to you now. You're the manager for project and construction management at GHD. What what's your sense of the state of smart construction in the Middle East at the moment? You know, what is it we're missing, and how are things moving towards smart construction?
Oh, okay. I'll do a little bit of scene setting first to lead in to be able to answer that question. First, a little bit about GHD. One of the world's largest engineering and professional services firms. We have a business here in the Middle East, but a global network of 10,000 people now. We're a business whose aim is clear, and that's to make water, energy and urbanisation sustainable for generations to come, and smart construction has a huge part to play in this aspiration. Now, in terms of the new age of smart construction, as we're saying what it is, we find ourselves, in our opinion, we're in an industry which is responsible for a huge range of impressive accomplishments, from cityscapes to foundational infrastructure, which in itself is building networks suitable for smart construction, for smart cities. However, it's important that we recognise that productivity growth over the last 20 years is only a third of economic averages in the construction industry. Digitization is lower than in nearly all other industries. Client outcomes are being affected greatly by time and cost overruns. Now, all of these foundational issues need to be addressed, and we feel it's by embracing technology, which will power new ways of working and constructing, as well as being more collaborative in order to reduce those ingrained silos that this can be achieved. I think that this industry has been ripe for change for decades, and we were talking about building information modelling. That as a concept has been around since the 1980s, albeit technology, you could argue, was much more rudimentary back then, but the concept has existed. It's now 2020, and the dynamism of the change has increased rapidly for a number of factors. And those that are planning and doing tomorrow what they did today are probably not going to be in a sustainable business. And I'm sure all of us here on this panel are constantly thinking about what needs to happen in order to get us to the future that we believe we need to get.
If I can just come in on one of the points you mentioned there, I'm quite curious. So obviously the construction industry itself, you know, GHD and Arcadis and ALEC, and you know, the companies from across the industry are talking about the need for increasing productivity and technology. Are we hearing it from the clients, the people who are actually spending the money on projects and sponsoring projects? Do they say to you or to people in the industry, we want smart construction? Or what is it? What's driving their needs? Is it just getting stuff delivered on time and on budget? They don't really care. Because when you talk about virtual twins and BIM, you need the client sort of involved as well, don't you?
Yeah, it happens, it obviously happens on both sides. You can't just do it and no one wants to invest in it. But I do think that obviously being an owner or a developer and thinking about investing more heavily in the front end to get a better outcome in the end, when you're still concerned about risk, time and cost overruns, you're going to be a little bit averse to doing that. That's true. So there's a lot of educational pieces that have to come together in order to get everyone moving towards the same direction. But if you think about investment itself, that the people who are investing, or the groups who are investing in construction, are also changing. They have more, they're more savvy, they're more tech savvy, they're more climate savvy. They are more demanding. And it's not that they will specifically say you have to do something in a certain way. It's more that to meet the needs of the clients, which with all the other societal, economic, climate pressures, we have to do it differently. We have to do it smartly. We have to use technology. And I think that, coming from both sides, for sure, will drive the change that we are talking about here.
And then just one final question for you, Paul, before I move on to Arsene. Wendu, in his final comments there, he said the fourth area of the fourth trend area was skills, that it's sort of the next generation of professionals. So at GHD, an engineering firm, how is that affecting you? You know, are you recruiting different people now? Are you finding you have to retrain current people? How is the sort of skills profile changing?
Yeah, it was a fantastic point. We're talking about data, talking about coding. And I think, as Nwendo mentioned, coding will become a core skill of a designer. That's definitely the way it's going. That will involve upskilling existing staff and also be focusing that on when we're looking at recruitment. But it also has to happen from an educational perspective as well. So as mentioned, the courses that are being offered have to also move with the times and make sure they're producing future-ready staff. That as well, perhaps apprenticeships are also the way to go. We're bringing people in, we're working closely with them, and we're educating as we go.
Okay, thank you, Paul. If people have any questions for Paul or Wendu or any of our other panelists, you can send in your questions using the Stage tab on the right-hand side of the screen. And once we've been through the sort of all of the panelists, we'll go into the formal Q&A. But thank you for that, Paul. Arsen Safarian, if I can come to you now, you are the head of BIM and digital construction at ALEC. Now, BIM, as Paul just mentioned, that's been around since the 80s, at least in concept, but we've really seen an acceleration of BIM adoption in recent years. How would you describe the state of play at the moment in terms of BIM adoption, the level of advancement, but also the kind of the shared understanding between different parts of the value chain for BIM? You know, how is the progress for BIM adoption going? Okay, Arsen, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm getting a very poor sound from you, and your camera seems to be frozen. Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll come on to Tim. So I apologize for that, Arsen, and if you can hear me, it might be you need to refresh your browser again, but I'll move on to Tim and I'll come back to you once we have you again. Tim, good morning. Thank you for your patience. You're last in the circuit, but not the least, so thank you for that. You are the Digital Transformation and Innovation Lead for the Middle East at Arcadis. So what I'd like you to do is bring together the points that have been made so far. I don't know, the one thing that stood out in Paul's comments, and I wanted to ask you, is this sense of I guess Paul didn't use the phrase, but the whole life value. So bringing in the client at an early stage, the client being the key kind of enabler. And I wonder if we are actually seeing any progress in that kind of mindset change to think about whole life costs. And I know that's something that Arcadis sort of thinks about, sort of asset management and whole life costs. So perhaps, Tim, just summarize where you see smart construction at the moment and then go on to that point.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, thanks for having me on the panel this morning. Good morning, everyone. I think it's a fascinating time for the industry. I think, you know, we've been dogged by various different problems over the decades. Productivity levels still struggling. We understand the impact that digitalization can have on our business models. We know that that's where we want to go, but we've struggled for whatever reason to really embed it in our business models. And I think what has been particularly eye-opening for me is to actually see what the COVID impact has had on our industry. And aside from, obviously, you know, it was the rapid deployment of a work from home strategy with, you know, the forced adoption of new technologies. I think what it's actually done is it's created a mindset where we're trying to solve problems in different ways using the technologies at our disposal. And what the COVID situation did was really shine a light on a number of problems that we had to solve. Right, we had to solve the remote inspection of construction sites. We had to solve the problem of the mass migration of people to work from home. You know, we had to solve the problem about, you know, what is the impact on our feasibility of projects through scenario planning. You know, which forced us to then look at data through a microscope and bringing together tools that enabled us to actually model those different scenarios. So it's really, you know, I think the way that I try and view, or rather Arcadis tries to view scalable use cases in technology is through the lens of the business model. So the four fundamentals of the business model: so desirability, are we actually solving a problem, a legitimate problem, or solving a client gain with this particular innovation or tech solution? Is it viable? So from a commercial viability, are we making any money from it? Can we make money from it over the longer term? Is it feasible? Do we have the tools necessary? Do we have to go and acquire those from the market? And then lastly, is it adaptable? So is this solution actually set up for long term, or that longevity that we need? And I think, as I said, the COVID impact has given us those problems to be solved. It's given us that that desirability that I think we can we need to focus on more in order to scale up and develop these new solutions. I think to your point around clients and the role they have to play in this, absolutely. It's fundamental, but I would actually go further than that and saying we have responsibilities across the entire value chain in terms of bringing on the industry, and we've seen reports only a couple of weeks ago and new agendas that have come out of the UK in terms of the new construction industry playbook that really puts the client front and center in driving a lot of this stuff, in terms of we need to become more of an output driven industry as opposed to the conventional cost KPIs and program KPIs. We need to have sustainability as core to our agenda. ESG is becoming more and more proliferant in corporate strategy now. So we're going to have to address these contemporary issues in new ways using technology. I think where we need clients to go, and clients said, to be fair, a lot of the clients in this region are aware of the advantages of technology. They believe that they can get more value-driven outputs from the use of technology, but we have to make sure that it's properly deployable, properly scalable, and it's solving that problem to be solved. And that's where the likes of Arcadis are working with our clients to really take a look at those new, take almost a client-centric or human-centric approach to identifying those problems and then creating a solution based upon the technologies that are out there, instead of taking a technology and then trying to find a problem for it to solve. It's a reverse, and I think that's where we're going to get more sustainable business models and technology adoption driving, moving forward.
If I'm a construction company chief executive or a consultant chief executive, and I'm aware that technology is changing, I'm aware there's a need to remove waste, to reduce my carbon footprint, to improve safety. How do I go about it? I mean, you just said that you don't sort of bolt on technologies. You have to fundamentally change the structures and the mindsets and the relationships. How do I start? I mean, you can't just redraw your whole business from should people be setting up sort of digital units parallel to their core businesses, or what do you think?
Absolutely, and I think we're going through a dual transformation in many ways, in the fact that we have to keep the business running in terms of protecting our current revenue streams, but then we're also developing new models as we're aware that actually we're going to be transforming as organizations to prepare ourselves for the future. So what we've seen, and actually one of the things that Arcadis have done, is created a new technology incubation, almost like a startup, I guess you could call it, called Arcadis Gen, where we're purely identifying problem statements and we are iteratively developing new business models through new tech solutions. Because actually we're aware that our existing structure, our legacy operating model, restricts us from scaling those new technologies. So it's almost like an experimental, iterative, design thinking unit. But that's just one thing that you could do, and not all companies, not all small SMEs particularly, have got the investment in order to do a similar thing. But what I think we have to do is take a look at our current business models and just do an audit. Look at those areas where actually we're at risk in terms of disruption. How we're delivering to market through our channels, for example, our cost structures, the tools, and the relationships that we have with our providers and our ecosystem partners, in order to do we actually have the means of co-creation and developing new solution very rapidly. And I think,
I'll tell you what, why don't I pause you there, because I think that's a great question to come back on. I'd like to bring Arsen back into the conversation. So, Arsen, I think we've got you back. Welcome back. And I don't know how much you missed there, but I
think a few seconds though. I hope you can receive me well now.
I can hear you well. Thank you very much, and I thank you for your patience. So we're just talking about with Tim there about the challenge of transforming whilst you've got an operating business and the sort of multitude of areas of change. So you're head of BIM and digital construction at ALEC, and we know that ALEC is a leading contractor in the UAE and are doing a lot of innovative things. How do how is the company doing that in terms of maintaining your existing operations whilst introducing this transformation? I mean, that must be incredibly difficult.
That's very difficult indeed. I think that's one of our main challenges because we have BIM, we have innovation, we have different streams of technology that are trying to transform the running business effectively, and the business is very project centric in a way. So you have ongoing projects, which is your core business, and you're trying to disrupt that from many angles. So that's a challenge in itself. But I'd like to think that we have this luxury of having a back office R&D type of a resource which tests and develops changes as the packages changes, and then it gets to be implemented on running projects. So that's how we're approaching this, and we're trying to also approach not the whole project or not the whole thing at once, but rather approach certain processes or certain elements within processes and disrupt those and make sure these work, and then go to the next, and then scale it across other projects or across the business.
Sorry to interrupt you, but one thing in other industries, and I'm thinking of the banking industry, for example, you'll have your traditional bank, and they form these they call them, they sort of use this phrase, ecosystems of fintechs and small tech companies, and they build these networks of technology providers. Does that work in construction as well? So if we say that ALEC is a traditional contractor and you've got competencies in a range of areas, but say you need to bring in new tech from areas where you don't have experience, do you form partnerships, or do you just hire people?
Yes. I mean, if you think about it, within the last year we have had a huge collaboration framework with the academia. In fact, we had New York University and Start AD effort, which involved a lot of startups, and our innovation team has done a great effort in that, in bringing new ideas and startups into the business and allowing them to test their ideas or their innovative tech, and whichever out of this would work for us, we would actually, instead of investing into the business, buy this and encourage their business to grow.
That's it. So the way you've done it so far, if I understood you correctly, so you're looking to find new partners or technologies out there, and you sort of do a pilot or sort of I don't know what you call it, a partnering program to see if it works, and then take it further from there.
And our investment effectively is being a potential client for these companies, for these startups, and buying their technology that works today for us and has a promise for tomorrow.
And that's
been going very successfully over the last year, and we have had a couple of success stories there.
And so you don't have to answer this question, but say that you form, I don't know, say you identify 30 companies or startups. What's the sort of, and it's early days, but will 29 of those not really work out and one might succeed, or will the majority work out? How does it go?
Yeah, I think out of around 10 shortlisted companies and initiatives, we did move forward with 3 of those as a pilot, and then effectively we ended up using 2 of them.
Fascinating. And you mentioned New York University there, so I'm interested in the reference to academia. We have Wendu with us from Heriot Watt. So from an ALEC's point of view, a contractor's point of view, is the role of the university or the academic sector, is that more important now as we do this digital transformation, or has it always been there, or how do you see that playing out?
I think in my personal view, it's very important, but as a business, as someone who leads the technology in this business, I still don't feel the resource, the educational pool of resources that come out of universities, and we have a choice to hire them. I still haven't experienced that, and I would like to see that. Unfortunately, I think due to the nature of this part of the world and how it operates, and people come and go, we don't have that permanency in terms of growing resources and then employing them into the business. It happens very rarely.
Yeah.
But we do have certain collaboration ties with a few educational institutions, even overseas, like in South Africa, for instance. We bring fresh graduates from universities every now and then.
Okay. Now, just to, sorry, I took you off topic a little bit. Well, it's on topic, but away from the sort of the BIM thing. I want to bring you back to BIM. So you're head of BIM at ALEC, and BIM and virtual twins or digital twins have been such a hot topic over the past 2 or 3 years when people have been talking about construction and the digital transformation. How is that going? Do we now have BIM specified in every contract across the world for construction, or is it more fragmented than that? And how does it work vertically through the supply chain? If ALEC has a BIM model with the client, do your suppliers plug in? Is that working fine? Where are we with the sort of adoption of BIM?
Yeah, I cannot speak for the world, but I think for this region where we have been operating for almost 20 years now, I can definitely say that within the last 8 years or so, there has been a tremendous progress with that. We have been talking earlier about clients and how important is their engagement or their understanding of the importance of BIM and digital technologies in construction. I think we're starting to see more and more RFPs, more and more tenders coming through with BIM requirements. In some cases quite detailed and mandatory, which in a way encourages or enforces the implementation throughout the supply chain. And if you think about it, say 5 years ago, 2 out of 10 contracts would come through with the BIM in the contract, BIM requirements within the contract. And these days it's the other way around. Probably 2 out of 10 aren't BIM specified. This has helped us as a business to scale through our supply chain, subcontractors, and sort of hold their hands and bring them across with us. However, we still see some subcontractors struggling with it, struggling in terms of understanding the value of technology for their own business, not just satisfying the contract participating, but understanding the value for their own benefit.
Yeah. I know it's interesting, very interesting that you've said that we've had that shift from 20% to 80% of contracts that you are seeing are specifying BIM. But I have heard in previous webinars and things that one of the challenges is then BIM itself is a very broad term. There's different levels of BIM and different definitions, and construction lawyers aren't tech people, so maybe they don't, when they write the contracts, there's the meanings are perhaps not quite well defined. Is there a problem, or is there a need for more work around developing tech-friendly construction contracts, or do you see any problems in that area?
Well, I think you're right. So for us, I think the thinking behind our approach to BIM is just a source. It's a means and methods. It's a foundational technology for us, whereas objectives prevail. So if a client comes to us with certain objectives that we can help achieve with BIM and BIM-enabled technology, then this is where it becomes more meaningful for us, and we're better able to convey the message to our partners and achieve something meaningful. So I think the objectives are more important than the ways to get there, because we can find different ways to get there, including BIM.
Okay, that's fantastic. Arshan, thank you very much for that. I'm going to give you a break for a moment. Just to let you know, I have had a couple of questions that have come in on 4D models. So I'm going to come back to you in a moment with some questions about 4D models. I don't really know what that means, but I'll give you a break for now, and I'm going to come back to some of our other panelists. For everyone watching, thank you for the questions that you have sent in so far. We've got half an hour for a discussion. Please send in your questions using the stage tab on the right-hand side of the screen, and we'll try and get through as many as possible. Right, so what I'm going to do is read out the question, and then we'll decide who can answer it. So this is a question that's come in. It says, we are seeing more artificial intelligence applications and other software being used in the back end, and using drones, precasting models, robotics, 3D printing, etc. How well can the current construction industry cope with this immense pace of technology, a pace of change in technology? And then further down the line, are we going to have an oversupply of these construction technologies in the future? I'm going to come to you, Paul, for no other reason than you've been quiet for a long time. So, how well is maybe you want to talk from an engineering consultant perspective, but how well is the industry prepared to cope with all of this technology that's being thrown at them?
Well, again, it's back to what we've discussed. It's about focusing on the outcome. Now, this technology and thinking about using parametric design, generative design, that form of kind of machine learning type design. I'm not sure whether it extends to what we call pure AI at this point in time. I think it's burgeoning, and some of my colleagues here might have other thoughts on that. But I think we can see definitely that, especially GHD, as we look at how we operate globally, it's very much a focus for us to be able to build these data models in order for them to be then used to facilitate offsite modular construction, robotic installation, but understanding that you have to have your framework as a designer building up in order to then have be at the right level of maturity is maybe not the right word, but the right level of information to allow the rest to happen. And I think it's important to remember that the foundations have to be there. We mentioned BIM as a foundational technology. We can't just skip steps and have robots build buildings. We need to make sure we're moving in the correct direction, which I'm sure all of us on this call are.
Here's a question for you, Paul, and I hope this isn't, I'm probably going to offend every single engineer that's watching this, but given that machines and robots can do all the number crunching very quickly and run through design codes, so the role of the engineer presumably has to change. And so how does the role of the engineer change? If the mathematics can be done by the computers, the engineer presumably is more involved in the broader aspects. And what are the skills for those future engineers? Is it using software, or is it doing engineering calculations?
Well, that's it. We can stage it all back to the advent of AutoCAD, bringing in Revit, and then into this day and age. Engineers need to be moving with the times and be able to use that technology. And I'll give you an example of what we're looking at GHD. We're just simply calling it digital engineering. So it's being able to use the model, being able to use the software to automate those calculations, which you would have to be referring to your codes and doing this and doing that and using your spreadsheets. All of that should be pre-written. There should be algorithms for it, and it should just be happening in the background. Your engineers are then free to conceptualize the design, to broaden the horizons, to look over different aspects, to make sure that the direction we're heading in is correct. Well, the kind of minutiae of the detail, the humdrum, is perhaps done by the machines. But obviously,
how do young engineers? So, from my knowledge of engineers, you build up over a professional career so much knowledge just from experience, and then what you've just described is that sort of the overview that an engineer provides. You can't bring that in if you're a new graduate engineer. But if the computers and the robots are doing the number crunching. What's the career for a young engineer now? How do they develop in this new environment?
So that's a very interesting question. I think that the development trajectory is still the same. An engineer still has to engineer. It's just that you are making your engineers more productive, really, by meaning the menial tasks are being done elsewhere. You still have to know if the answer is correct. You still want to know if the answer that is coming back is in the correct range in order to, perhaps it's not being done properly. But it's the thought of increasing our productivity. That is a huge driver for the success of this industry. It's trillions of dollars if we allow the productivity to increase. It's only by harnessing this technology and allowing people to have more time doing the important high-value tasks that we'll be able to do that. So I think very much trajectory should still be the same, but different skill sets, and that's back to the educational piece. It's back to good graduate programs, which GHD have globally. But yeah, it's just that rounded focus.
Okay, thank you.
I'll say something, if I may.
Yes, sure. I was going to come to you anyway, Wendy.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we also need to be careful about is over-reliance on technology and using technology for the wrong things as well. So people talk about 3D printing, modular construction, robotics, AI. We need to make sure that we're actually using these technologies in the right applications. So 3D printing is not necessarily the be-all and the future for construction. It's just complementary to other forms of construction that are out there. Robotics, we've got to be careful that, we don't say everything we're doing in future has to be by robots. It may be better not to use a robot and use something else. So I think we just have to be careful as well how we adopt technology, and it has to be, fit for purpose.
Okay, and the thing I wanted to come back to you on as well was Arsen's point about the relationship with the academic sector or startups. I had assumed when we talked earlier about the Centre of Excellence for Smart Construction that we're talking about big companies that come and invest in R&D and in research. Arsen and Paul just now were talking about skills, and you mentioned skills as well, sort of the toolkit that graduates come out of university with. How closely does an institution like Heriot-Watt or other universities, how closely do you sort of collaborate with what the industry needs, and how much is pure research? How do you find that balance?
Well, what we would tend to do is co-create what we're doing. So we wouldn't just do things within the university without consultation with industry. And I do agree with Arsen. There needs to be better understanding of what's coming out from the universities and what the industry needs. So there has to be that dialogue in terms of interaction between universities and industry. I mean,
would you say that's happening at the moment? I mean, has it happened in the past? Is it happening now? Does it need to be done better?
I mean, it's happening. I mean, certainly in parts of Europe, UK, that's happening quite a lot.
But in the Middle East, I mean, in this market.
Yeah, I think there are pockets of it happening. I think more of it needs to happen. I mean, one of the things that we are doing as a university is we're actually setting up incubators for startups that potentially would engage with organizations like ALEC and other industries out there. But just on the skills thing as well, so there's, if you like, potentially the kind of graduates that are coming out from universities, there's upskilling of people within the workforce, but there's also the opportunities to have like an integrated work-based program. So you're doing your work, but as part of your work, you're actually working towards getting an academic qualification. So I think there's also that part of studies as well, because there's a tendency to think you're doing a bit of training for a short period of time, or you're studying in university for a short period of time, but then you might be doing something in the workplace that can help you achieve academic qualifications. So the work that you're doing is actually helping you achieve an academic qualification, possibly a professional qualification as well.
Okay, thank you for that. If any of you have questions for Wendy or any of the other panelists, please send them in. We've got about 15 minutes remaining on this discussion. I'm going to move back to Tim now from Arcadis. Now, Tim, there's a couple of questions that have come in. They're not related, but I'm going to put them to you. The first one is, what is the, in your opinion, what is the major prospective area for construction productivity enhancement, and how much room for productivity enhancement is there? So that's the kind of $54 million question. You know, but what are the key technologies, and how much room for improvement is there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, isn't it? And I think you have to probably look at the project life cycle in chunks to see where the most value can be had. Now, certainly in the front end, you know, within the planning and the design stage, there's a lot of optimization you can do in terms of integration of data sets. So, you know, looking at utilizing BIM as a process in order to integrate with cost data, with schedule data, maybe even getting data from how the end user interacts with similar benchmarked assets. You can optimize the design process up front. There's huge gain there and huge potential there. And obviously Arcadis very much focus on that space in terms of that design and engineering.
Sorry to interrupt you, Nick, in the middle of an important point. I want to come to bring Alec in, or Arsen in, on exactly what you just said. That idea of bringing the contractor in earlier and even the end user at the start of the process. Arsen, from your point of view as a contractor, and especially one who's the head of BIM, are we seeing that? Are we now seeing a shift? Because this has been such an important topic for years, you know, bringing in the downstream parties at the start. Are we now seeing it because of BIM, in your opinion?
It's not because of BIM, but I think it's because of the change of mindset. We see more design and build contracts than ever before, but it's still a fraction of the contracts. And early engagement of contractors, especially the front runners or shortlisted ones. Like we have been engaged in a couple of big tenders recently where we feel like we are far deeper engaged than before when we were tendering for jobs. And it's a positive trend because we are able to advise on buildability and viability of contracts far ahead.
Earlier on, you said, and I'm not trying to trip you up or anything, but earlier on you said, you know, where previously 20% approximately of contracts specified BIM, now we have 80%. To make BIM work properly or effectively, just by using it, you're going to bring in the contractors earlier. So what you're saying is we're not seeing the same shift in mindset. We're not, whilst 80% of contracts are specifying BIM, we're not seeing 80% of clients bringing in the contractor.
Well, like I said before, so BIM is just a technology that allows you to work with data better and visualize it better, I believe. So, and it has many adjacent processes that comes with it that help you modernize your legacy processes. So in that, whether you're engaged earlier or later, I think use of BIM or the mandate of BIM has nothing to do with it. So it's just helping
the BIM, again, I apologize for my ignorance, but one of the benefits is the identifying clashes that might traditionally be spotted on site and lead to disputes or disagreements.
Yeah, one of those things, but I believe broader design coordination has far more things than just clashes. And this is where we come in early and advise the clients and our partners, our consultants on the buildability and the need for information, let's put it this way, whether it's sufficient to go ahead with the construction or not, and what is needed to get there. I mean, this is where the most value is of engaging a contractor early, even if it's not on contract basis, but just, you know, early enough in the tender stage or even the post-tender stage to make sure that when the contract is awarded, it's actually doable, it's buildable.
Okay, I'm good. Thank you for that. Sorry to cut you off, Tim. I'm going to come back to you. You were talking about. I just thought it was a really good moment to bring in Alec on that point. The second part of the question that you were answering, as well as the areas for productivity improvement, was how much room is there for productivity improvement? How inefficient and how wasteful is the industry today?
I think the short answer to that question is there are massive opportunities, and we are very inefficient and very unproductive. You read various different reports. I quote the McKinsey one, came out a couple of years ago, Reimagining Construction, I think it was called. And they cite that 35 to 40% productivity gains are up for grabs. And obviously, the adoption and utilization of technology is going to be key in terms of getting us there. So I think, without... we could talk about the shortfalls of the industry all day, right? But I think we just have to be aware that we have to start somewhere. I think as an industry collectively, we have to drive a greater consistency with how we manage our information. The development of certain standards which will enable us to then operate at a scalable level, so we can then start developing processes that are more integratable, if that's a word, with our partners and our stakeholders. If we're able to do that, and then deploy a technology solution across the top that then automates those consistent standards and processes, we're going to get there a lot quicker. And we have seen kind of green shoots in that area. I think BIM standards are becoming a lot more mature now. The UK BIM standard, which I think a lot of countries are trying to aspire to, is now turned into an ISO, or international standard, that is is beginning to drive that consistency, specifically with regards to how we manage information. So I think if we as an industry gravitate towards a specific standard, we are going to get there a lot quicker as we begin to then automate those processes that we develop based upon that standard.
And there's one I'm going to ask you all to be shorter now in your answers, because we've only got about 5 or 6 minutes remaining. Tim, again, the second question I was going to put to you is about how can SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, how can SME construction firms innovate their operations without affecting their bottom line? So as everyone will know, small companies have got much more fragile finances. What would your thoughts be, Tim, on how small, maybe these startups and things, how can they innovate?
Yeah, sure. I think what it comes down to is driving and embedding a culture of innovation and creative thinking within organization. And I say that not as a throwaway comment. I know there's a lot you could do in that area, but I think what I've seen in my experience is, if you have a vision, if you have a purpose as a business and a company, and then you encourage people to come forward with new ideas and creative thinking around how you're going to drive that purpose in the work that you do, and then find a way of actually selecting, identifying those ideas that you believe have got the most potential and scalability in your business, that's a good start. Again, I think it's probably a topic of conversation that would take an hour to to properly pull apart. But there's a lot of literature out there. There's a lot of thinking out there about how you embed an innovation culture within an organization, and I encourage every business to try and do that.
Well, okay, just on that point about the ongoing conversation, just to let everybody know that this platform will remain active for 24 hours after the end of the event today. So if people want to carry on networking using this platform and then picking up on, as the points that Tim just mentioned, or any other points, you can use the networking function for the next 24 hours after the event today. So that's to the end of tomorrow, really. A couple of other points that have been submitted by viewers. Somebody has said that 6% of the total project cost goes on rework. So I don't know where that data comes from, but that's been submitted. 96% of all data captured in the engineering and construction industry goes unused. Again, I don't know the source of that information, but somebody has submitted that. And then there was another piece of data. Capital projects typically take 20% more time than scheduled to complete. So just, again, I don't know the sources of those data, but it's, I'm trusting that it's coming from reliable sources. Okay, now, Arsen, I said I was going to come to you on this question of 4D models. So I gave you a sort of break for a minute or two. Somebody has just said 4D models, and then they have said design to construction is highly driven by 4D model. What does that mean, Arsene? Is that an important topic?
Well, yeah, 4D for us is the second most prioritized BIM use case. In that, when even at the tender stage, we receive models from consultants and we prepare our construction schedule, we tend to put a simple logic in both the construction schedule and the models. That is where and what. So we codify all the activities by category of work and where in the project they happen. So the location breakdown. And we do the same with the model, and then we simulate the both databases together to make sure that we have optioneering, if you will, and we choose the best program possible for the project. And that happens upfront at the tender stage. And during the construction, we use the same methodology to deeper integrate the construction schedule and the models, construction models in this case, to report on progress as well as project look-aheads, visually project look-aheads for the site team. Yes. So it's a quite important topic for us.
Okay, so 4D models, a very important topic, and perhaps another topic that people might want to discuss in the networking function of this site over the next 24 hours or more. Wendu, during your keynote comments at the beginning, the first area you talked about, and you made a lot of points on materials, so I'm assuming that is a very big area for you. You talked about low energy materials, maintaining performance of materials, measuring and monitoring materials, and then you touched on to storage and carbon capture. Somebody has submitted a point here, and I don't know if this comes from an Autodesk person, but they say Autodesk is working on a nice concept called generative design. It is focused on products, how it can be used in construction design to improve material uses, get lighter designs and faster construction. So I don't know if you know of that particular, technology, but how are we innovating materials design to reduce the carbon footprint and to be more efficient?
Well, I think the two key things is, obviously you've got to look at how much energy is involved in actually producing the materials. So in comparison to cement, basically it uses less energy, 90% less energy than the production of cement. So for me, it's the kind of whole life cycle of the material from, cradle to grave. So it's the amount of material usage, not using non-renewable material. Also, that material during the life cycle, how much embodied energy is also being used as part of that process. And it's basically that whole life cycle, really. Okay.
Now I'm going to come, this is probably the last question, and again, it's probably unfair to put it to you, Wendu, but I'm going to, because maybe it says past tech waves in construction have not reached their promise in terms of productivity gains. Do you have any feedback? Is there any research that shows why this is? Is it organizational issues? If that statement is correct, what's the reason for it? And then how can we ensure that this wave of digitalization is going to deliver what it promises?
So for me, the key thing is working collaboratively. I couldn't
relationships.
It's about relationships, and for me, I think the important thing is relationships between academia, industry, and the public sector. It has actually, most economists would agree that the productivity and goods and services of the country would be better improved if you put a bit more money into research and innovation, but with that collaborative effort between academia and industry. So it may well be, I don't know the details of that particular question there, but I think it's getting organizations to work together collaboratively. There's been a lot said about productivity and efficiency as well.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you. We've reached the limit of our time, but I want to do one very fast experiment. I want each of you to give me one word that's going to be the key word in how do we ensure that this wave of technology innovation for construction delivers the productivity gains that we want. So I'm going to start with Paul and go around each of you. What's the one word thing that's going to deliver what we're promising here? Paul?
Modular construction.
Excellent. Wendu, you just said it, but you can say it again.
Collaboration.
Okay, Tim.
Scalability.
Arson.
Mindsets.
Excellent. 4 fantastic answers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for a wonderful panel. It was a really good discussion. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful debate.